and she's tugging on her dad's jacket. And she says, "Daddy, if we can buy a place here, I will give up my allowance for the rest of my life."
That's great.
And
That's great.
Jeff knew that those kids were going to play a part in that family's decision making.
Yeah, that's interesting.
As opposed to some sales guys would leave the kids in the car.
Welcome to The Marketing Leader, a podcast for those shaping the future of marketing. I'm Justin Murphy, the principal of YCP, and we're excited to have you listening and watching today. We sit down with the people who are leading the market when it comes to their positioning, how they think, and how they lead their companies forward in today's world.
Hi, I'm Curt Westlake. I'm the creative director here at YCP. And joining us today on the Marketing Leader podcast is Dan Collins, who's a founding partner at Collins & Fine Group, and Peter Doyat, who is the managing director at Real Living Productions. These two individuals have a wealth of experience in marketing to high net worth individuals for some of the most exclusive properties and communities in literally the Western Hemisphere. Dan, tell us a little bit about your firm.
So we are, my partner and I, Bruce Fine, have a firm that does marketing and sales, strategic development, branding for high-end resort real estate communities. And we've been, collectively, we have about, close to 80 years of experience working, as you say, all over the hemisphere, the continental United States, Hawaii, the Caribbean. So that's kind of where we focus our efforts.
Peter?
Real Living Productions is travel, hospitality, and resort real estate marketing and lead generation. Our roots started here in Greenville, South Carolina. We also have a concentration of staff up in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Maryland as well.
Peter has done a tremendous job, and when we kind of started to create Collins & Fine, we had a company called Real Living Productions at the time, and we just didn't have the bandwidth nor really the interest of taking that mixed-use, multi-purpose marketing company on, and we called Peter up and said, "Hey, would you like to take this over for us?" And he jumped on it and has done an incredible job. And we're very blessed to have a great relationship, very mutually respectful. And I think that's the key to the whole thing is that we have we've worked very hard to carve our niche, both of us, in the marketplace, and we have huge respect for each other in that, and that's what is the key.
Well, Peter, how would you describe what makes you guys different in your different spheres of marketing or influence, or how you really differentiate the two businesses?
Well, absolutely. I have an utmost respect for Dan. Dan really and truly is the reason I'm in the industry. He gave me my first opportunity in 2006, which is going on 20 years this year. And just watching how he navigated the industry and what he did was really a cornerstone in my learning of what resort and marketing needed to be at this level. And so as time went on and I had the opportunity to kind of branch out and start my own agency, it was textbook, what would Dan do and what did Dan do at his prior lives and operations. And so I've really had a sound foundation to create this. And so what Real Living is now is kind of a genesis of resort and real estate marketing, but also we're focusing also on the travel and the hospitality space as well. So some of our stuff does span a little outside of the real estate arm of this, but yet at the same time, it's still very focused on that person that, places. Where do we want to go? Where do we want to stay? And what are we looking to do in the future?
Did you imply that I have multiple lives, like a cat?
Is that true? Because we're wondering.
I'm actually on my ninth.
Well, then be careful.
Yeah. Watch out for buses.
Exactly.
So you both have a combined, skill set. Obviously, learning, Peter from Dan, and Dan, learning the business in multiple different, past companies that you've founded. Today, as you look at the landscape of where marketing is going, specifically tailored around marketing to high net worth individuals, what would you say it is just essential to think or to have a mindset to think today to be a successful marketer to that group?
In my mind, it's so much more personalized now than what used to be this shotgun approach that would just go out to everybody. And especially when you're at this tier and this level, the people that you're approaching and that you're trying to market to are used to being catered to in a very specific way. So we have to take that into our marketing as well. We have to take that into, what approach are we giving to them? Is it right for them and their family? And how do we tailor things to accomplish our clients' goals, but also accomplish the buyers' needs and wants that they're looking for as well?
How does that look practically when you were describing, we have to market differently to that group? Describe or help us understand, what does that look like practically?
Well, that's a great question, and it's very diverse. It means looking at it from in my childhood, we used to have these things called the choose your own adventure books, and where you would start on chapter 4, and you could make a decision if you wanted to do A or B, which would skip you ahead to different places within the book. I find that to be almost the way marketing is now, because your prospect can go down so many different paths to get to the way they want to be. And so we have to be cognizant of that and think of, what could this buyer, could this prospect be interested in? And if they react in this way, how do we, how our sales teams, does a developer or a hotelier address that? So we're utilizing market knowledge. We're talking to sales teams. I have admittedly learned from Dan that there's these follow-up emails that need to go out after any kind of a tour has occurred, so that you can get kind of some knowledge of what that experience was like for the people who did that visit. And then I think all of that information, with the advent of AI, we have a brand new tool that I think allows us to just really dive in and understand the data, the sheer volume of data that already comes, but it makes it more manageable, and it also uncovers a lot of insight that I think a few years ago we just didn't have the time, the bandwidth, or the knowledge of how to approach this stuff. So that's kind of where I see the market going in that space.
When I began working in this space, really working, which was in the early 90s with my brother, um, the concentration of wealth, and it's still there, was predominantly, if not exclusively, in the baby boomer generation. And so we spent a tremendous amount of time. I was born in 1959, he was born in 64, so we are on the tail end of that generation. But we spent a tremendous amount of time trying to understand what the motivations were for that generation of people.
And what did you find? What were some of the
Oh,
top motivations?
I mean, a lot of what Peter said. I mean, they love to be catered to. They have a they put a tremendous sense of value in brand identity. So that was kind of the rise of the major hotels doing resort real estate, because people were attached to Ritz-Carlton, attached to Hyatt, whatever. So, and that they were the beginning of a group of people who said that our greatest currency in life is our time, period. Because they didn't really worry about money. Now, fast forward to today, we now have a significant group of very wealthy millennials. The oldest millennials are now bringing significant wealth, not quite as comparable as, but it's a different kind of wealth.
And what do they want today? What do millennials want?
They want immediate gratification. And I'll give you just an anecdote. As we started to see this at the end of like 2017, 2018, we were working in Lake Tahoe. And so our marketplace was Silicon Valley, San Francisco, San Jose, in that area. And we saw people, millennials, who, instead of spending money on outrageous real estate in San Francisco for a primary residence, they were renting and they were buying a second home in Lake Tahoe as their first real estate purchase. Yeah. And because they are very experiential, they love adventure, as Peter said. So really understanding the marketplace and who you're marketing to has been a critical element in terms of formatting the marketing and sales process to be successful.
Why do people miss that? Even marketing leaders miss that critical discipline of knowing your audience to that degree, to that close, proximity that you really find essential to connecting, selling to them, marketing them, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the instant gratification. It goes back to just the overabundance of information that's available to us. And rather than sit down and do long range thought and planning, they're looking for immediate answers. And when we talk about AI, I'll kind of expound upon that because I think AI gives us a great opportunity to start to build that practice again, which we've gone away from. And so it's like a one size fits all, and that's just not the truth. Every client that walks into an office or you show a house to or whatever, you have to understand kind of what their motivations are, deeply understand that. And that's the sales process, as opposed to just, okay, here's the house, you like it or not, let's go to another.
That kind of brings me back to the journeys, the multiple journeys that people are on, that you'd mentioned a little bit earlier, Peter. One of the interesting things about that to me is, like, with all these different motivations and all these different journeys that people are going on, how do you track, as a marketer, how do you track that, learn from it, and build, improved strategies and tactics?
Well, one of the ways we use that information is through CRMs. Each of our projects we advise on there's a need for a CRM, which is beneficial to tracking each and every individual's interest, their engagement with any emails that we might send them. Are they reaching out and having phone conversations? We're even down to the fact of password protected portals now. So what we really get out of a password portal is that we, as the developer, as the client who has hired us, we have the ability to be aware of when that prospect is logging into that portal. And so the advantage of that for the sales team, for the developer, for the hotel partner is that we can kind of track and understand how engaged and how interested that prospect may be. And in turn, our sales team can go and give that person a more tailorized approach. So if they're interested in a ground floor condo unit, because they want something that's ease of access directly by a pool, or if they want something that, 12th floor of a penthouse, we can understand what that buyer looks like, what their interest levels are, and approach them differently based on what they're kind of catered to.
It probably closes the sales cycle because you're more informed as, a sales associate to try to, you know, understand what they really want at the end of the day and close that gap as quickly as you can.
Yeah. If marketing and sales teams are not religiously following the dictates of managing your customer responses, you are taking a step back every single day, and you're gonna lose that client.
What do you think is the real gel that brings them together, and how effective are they when they work together?
It's funny you say that because that is the story of origin for IMI, which was the original company that my brother and I kind of reviewed the landscape, and I worked in the more traditional side of things, and we started looking at the conflict and the hostility at times between sales and marketing organizations that have the same goal. And you're exactly right. The marketing guys are going, salespeople are terrible, they can't close. Sales guys are going, marketing guys, the leads are terrible. And what we did was we built an organization that said sales and marketing, and then eventually closing, because that's how we all got paid. But sales and marketing kind of lived to survive together, and the left hand always knew what the right hand was doing. For the first decade, my brother and I, we lived on the road together, stayed in the same condos, had the same conversations every day, and we made sure that there were direct communications. Anytime we were running ads, The marketing strategy was out into the sales force. And so when they were taking a phone call, they had a copy of the Wall Street Journal ad that was running. And so that just over time, we started to blend that and build compensation packages that were mutually beneficial to both sides. And that was the key to and still is the key for sure. Our goal is that every time we have communication with you, whether it's verbal, text, email, face-to-face, we're driving you as a potential buyer to saying yes to my next ask, so that I'm always giving you an opportunity to affirm what I'm telling you, and that gives me permission to make another contact with you. And that process flows downhill from initial inquiry all the way to executing a contract.
So if I understood what you said, yes or permission marketing is really trying to get the prospect to say yes to just the next
Simple
thing.
steps.
Yeah.
Come visit us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'd love to come see you.
Mm-hmm. So not just the outcome of selling or closing, but yes to the next step.
Exactly.
And how have you found that work kind of practical? Tell us a
Let
story.
me share one quick anecdote on that about knowing your customer. We had a great sales guy who was completely devoted to understanding his clients and his database, but he was exceptional. I'm talking about Jeff Hull, exceptionally outgoing. And he had a family that had 2 young girls who were just these audacious, running around. I mean, they were controlling the room, classic California kids. And one of the amenities we have out there is this place called the Family Barn. And it's got,
I remember that.
yeah, it's got bowling alleys
Yep.
and
Yep.
basketball courts and vending machines and a milkshake place and candy. And so Jeff's out there touring the mother and father, and the girls, he says to the girls, you guys just run, go have fun, and mom and dad and I are going to be here. Well, about 10, 15 minutes later, one of the little girls comes back and she's tugging on her dad's jacket. She says, Daddy, if we can buy a place here, I will give up my allowance for the rest of my life.
That's great.
And Jeff knew
That's
that those kids were going to play a part in that family's decision making.
Yeah. That's interesting.
As opposed to some sales guys would go, leave the kids in the car, right? So
I think you brought up a good point. Like, you're not just selling to a particular decision maker, even within a family. You're really thinking about the whole family. I remember a story. We have a board member who's a former CFO of Dr. Pepper, and he describes buying a BMW, their first BMW in Atlanta. And he took the kids with him, which he says was the first mistake, because that salesperson really understood that they were part of that decision and gave them swag and hats and all those things. Yeah. And so they're sitting in the back of this BMW saying, Daddy, can we buy this car?
We love this car.
And how can you say no to 2 little girls, wearing BMW caps? Yeah. It's hard to do.
When you talk about yes marketing, you're just talking about getting them to say yes to the very next step in the process. We call that nurturing and engagement. And what we see time and time again when we get invited just to have a first time conversation with a developer, with a sales team, is that they're already just giving everything away immediately. The first time you talk to this person, or that first email that they send to a brand new prospect, here are 17 things. Here's our brochure, here's our floor plans, here's our covenants, here's our HOA document. And they have essentially just regurgitated everything that they have.
They've turned it into work.
And it really,
that's a great point. Great point.
It's a fine line of save this stuff. Just gently give them one thing at a time, so that you have time and time again just another excuse to talk to this person. But if I'm the consumer and I get overloaded with all this stuff right at the bat, it's off-putting to me. And so Dan is absolutely right about this yes marketing concept is it's much more approachable and receptive. But from a developer's standpoint, when we come to a project, the first thing we look at is, are we getting bombarded with this stuff? And we just say, strip it down, hold it back, save this stuff because you're just losing consumers and customers left and right because you're just giving them too much at one
Well,
point.
and if talking about as you get into the minutia of like legal documents and things like that, we're selling multi-million-dollar properties to people who are their net worths are gigantic, sometimes in the billions. And so we talk about decision makers, family, all that, but they're accountants and attorneys. And so if you are getting close with somebody and you know that you may have a difficult contract, a lot of developers write one-sided contracts. And so part of the permission marketing is to say, we're getting close to this, and the last thing I want is for you to blindly send that contract to your attorney because it's going to come back redlined beyond all belief. How about we do this? How about you let me send that contract, and then I'll be on the phone, and I'll have my developer on the phone if I need to answer your attorney's questions, because there's going to be questions. And when we do that, we are eminently more successful than we are.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're involving even the partners that work with your prospect, not just their family members, but you're thinking even beyond their immediate circle of family to how do we consider who this might go to? Like you said, their accountant, their lawyer, et cetera. And Peter, some of the things that you mentioned, I was thinking one of the things that's stuck out to me over the years marketing this group is a simple phrase that's so powerful. I've been thinking about you. And you send them just a little line that starts with that, and you send them, hey, this is what reminded me about you. Here's what I think, would benefit you. Very simple but powerful words. I can remember working with a client in Stewart, Florida, with their sales team. We had done their website and some of their marketing efforts digitally, and we were driving leads, the age-old marketing versus sales. Yeah. And they're like, well, every time we email these leads or try to follow up, we get ghosted. And maybe marketers listening to this probably feel that way about some of their prospects. And so by taking a look, we said, okay, what we know we're tracking, we're sending you all these leads, but you're telling us you're not getting a response. Let's figure out why. The first email that prospect was receiving, we took their top agents and we said, all right, send us your normal, candid, first approach email that you respond. Well, like you were saying, Peter, it's bullet points of all the different things. That email was probably 400 words long, which breaks every rule of emails. And two, there wasn't a single question. They were giving all the same bullet points on the landing page that they had filled out a form to request more information. And they were just regurgitating the same thing and not asking a simple question. Not one. And we're like, this is why they're not responding, because there's nothing to respond to.
We've noticed, and I'm sure Peter has as well, but that inbound response is primarily from digital sources, SEO, pay-per-click. We are seeing a surprising uptick in people providing, high net worth people providing us with telephone numbers, really? which a decade ago on BRCs and any of that, you would never get that. And so we look at that and we say, okay, that client, that prospect is essentially saying, I'm ready to talk to somebody. So we have a different parameter on when that lead comes in with a phone number, how long it has to sit before it's contacted.
Well, in 2026, in today's world, do people actually pick up the phone?
Sometimes they do, but texting has become the absolute way because it still gives a level of a firewall to the client, but it's quick bursts, it's back and forth, and you can glean as long as you're asking questions.
When you text them for the first time, what are you asking?
In our cases, a lot of our sales teams are reaching out and just saying, acknowledging first off that they've received contact from them. They've said, I'd like to schedule a call with you just to introduce, to talk to you a little bit about the project and learn what you're interested in. Because at that stage, we don't know what they're interested in.
And it's intent. Well, you can glean from, for example, the messaging that you send out on a pay-per-click. Somebody goes on your website and they click the contact us and you get or we get a landing page that's specific to a particular house. So we can make an assumption, we can make a leap that says, okay, that house, for some reason, that house clicked with you. Are you guys interested in, as Peter said, are you guys interested in a house like this or similar to this? What is your time frame? What's in it, depending on when, what's your budget? All of that just kind of devolves, that creates, but asking a question in the context of, I'm here to help solve your problem. You're not here to help me make a commission. I'm here to help solve your problem because you've got a desire, a want, a need, or you may even have a problem.
Turn that into some questions that people listening could really say, that's what you're talking about.
I'm really interested in finding out what the issue is. And so I'm saying, so how does a place like Hartness, for example, how does that meet your needs? That's a question that I would ask. How do you believe what you know about Hartness right now? How does that meet your needs? And I would also ask about, at some point in time, I would ask about, tell me more about your family structure. So I'm trying to glean intent on that, as primary residence, resort, second home, whatever.
How much of that interaction is scripted, or how much is it left up to the individual salesperson to kind of find their path?
From a training standpoint, it's very scripted.
It should
but
be.
whether it's used, and then we encourage sales guys to develop their own personality, but we also tell them, just like going out on a sales tour. If we go out and we tell you to turn left at a particular point, you should probably turn left at that point, because there's thought about how you are unveiling this particular project in such a way that it makes sense to the client.
What about email? We talked about email. Sometimes when you don't have their phone numbers and texting them isn't an option. What in email should be the first contact or question or way to really engage them, in your opinion, Peter?
We want to reward this person. We want to, as I told you earlier, a lot of developers just give everything away for free on a website. And we are much more focused on restricting some of that, holding it back so that that prospect requests this stuff. And so that first email, when we get to that point, is a delivery, a promise kept of what they were asking for. Because if they get that first email and what they have requested isn't there, you've already broken a rule of trust. They're trusting that by giving you their information, they're going to get what they expected in return. And if they don't get it, you've already kind of created more of a problem than necessary. So,
and emails are tough. Emails are, unless you have permission from that client, emails are just going to get lost. And that's why we've seen texting become so much more effective.
I like what you guys are hinting on here, and even Peter, what you said about you've broken, that first opportunity for trust, because that's what the sales process is all about, isn't it? Where you're really building trust in a person and them with you, so that they feel like you care about them enough to help them get what they need at the end of the day. Is that kind of what you guys are saying?
Absolutely spot on.
Have you, now, I imagine every prospect is probably finding the same thing to be true. They're not just reaching out to one property or another. Most likely, they're probably reaching out to multiple. I don't know if there's an average on that, how many properties they're looking at, or different communities they're looking at. Is there an average in your business?
Well, I don't know that there's an average, but it's certainly like on the Atlantic seaboard from Virginia to South Carolina, there are any number of resort, residential, private club communities. And typically when we're talking to people, they are looking at Wilmington, they're looking at Cape Charles, they're looking at Myrtle Beach. And so these clients are very well heeled in terms of knowing what the marketplace is. They've probably got friends at each one of those communities. And so you have to, as a salesperson and as a marketing team, you have to know. We did a project for 6 years called Bay Creek, which was on the eastern shore of Virginia. And it was arguably the northernmost community that modeled the places in Wilmington and all the way down. And so we would typically get clients, we would be their first stop. And so our salespeople were at a significant disadvantage because they're going, well, we love this place, it's great, but we gotta go to Wilmington. Yeah, we're gonna go because we're set up to go to these other places. And our deal would be, okay, we try hard to sell them, but it's a multi-visit sale now. And so we would just hope to get them on their way back too, so that they've
How
had
would you do that? What would you do to incentivize that?
Well, we would certainly recognize, and we would never disparage any of the other communities. We would always talk about, okay, you're going to see some great stuff. You're going to see some great stuff. And hopefully, and we believe that our community rivals and in many ways excels. So please go, enjoy, study hard. And if you have questions, you can always reach me, and hopefully you'll come back. You'll come back and we can settle on something here. But knowing where that client is in the process is a huge deal.
Do you leave that up to chance for them coming back, or do you have a intentional way that you try to, I don't know, circle back with them, or I'm not sure what approach you use?
Yeah, you can't. I don't think you can do that with incentives. It's like Peter said. It just is a matter of you gotta deploy at the proper time, and understand you're not going to get. I mean, if you get 10% of the people that you see, you're closing at a higher rate than most sales teams are closing at.
How do you, so we're talking about essentially positioning ourselves as marketers and our properties and whatever we're selling against competitors. So how do we not, just blend in as a Me Too brand, especially in the private club and community space? There are so many options. They're probably bombarded with emails and texts and things. How do you stand out as the choice, not simply a choice?
This is the highest concentration of branded residential real estate ever at any time in history. So that means that the St. Regis's, the Ritz-Carlton, they're all playing in this space and they've been here for a long time. But now you have more emerging brands that are coming in. You have car companies that are coming in now that have high rises and condo units. You have surfing companies, Quicksilver, which when I was a teenager, I had all these funky clothes and stuff that I couldn't stand up on a surfboard to save my life, but it was just a cool thing. And so there are brands that have never been in the residential space that are now backing and putting their name on this. What that also means, and this really kind of comes full circle, is today's buyers are buying based on what their needs and their desires are. And of course, that's always been the case, but I think now more than ever, you have the luxury of choice as a buyer. And that choice can be, do I want something that has stuff for my family to do? Do I want stuff where, I'm an auto aficionado or I'm a surfing guy? And so there's just so much variety now for that consumer to buy from. And so
Doesn't that create kind of that sense of analysis paralysis when you're trying to make a decision and you just are, you're
overload.
considering so many things, so many properties. How do you differentiate your offering in the midst of all that information?
This is where collaboration with the developer is absolutely essential, because what you end up having to do is you have to, as a successful sales organization with a client, you have to zero in on what is the differentiating factor, whether they have friends from their neighborhood in Philadelphia who have retired to wherever you're at, whether you have grandchildren that are 2 hours away as opposed to 6 hours away. But collaboration with the developer in creating unique structures of memberships. I mean, we've seen over the last decade, you've seen memberships that are multi-generational memberships, both up and down, so that if I'm a 45-year-old wealthy millennial and my dad is 65 and still very active, if I join a club, he and my mom have the ability to use my membership, and then my kids have the ability to do that.
So that's what you mean by up and down.
Up and down,
Yeah.
multi-generational
Yeah,
up and
exactly.
down. And the reality is the developer will say, well, that's going to cost me a fortune. It's not used anywhere near as much as the perception is, but the perception at the point of sale is I'm doing this for a bigger cause than just rewarding myself.
Right.
And these folks are very philanthropic. And when we're back in the day when we were ordering consumer direct mail lists, we had the ability through Lifestyle Selector and some of the other groups, but you could choose a participation in philanthropy as one of the selects. And we saw a tremendous response when we were talking to people who were stated philanthropists. So, but again, to come back to the point, collaboration with the developer to create something that's differentiating is absolutely critical, and understanding what your competitors are doing.
How do you let's flip over to the marketing side. So how do you, from a marketing standpoint, use creativity to actually differentiate and stand out? Can you give us some stories of where you threw out a creative idea that you weren't sure if it would work, you were trying something new? Tell us some stories about how you've really seen creativity make the difference in positioning that property over others.
So we have two absolute, when we're taking on a new project, we produce what we call the day in the life video. And so we rely heavily on video content. So day in the life video is put together as just basically walking somebody up from having coffee on their front porch all the way through all the things that you would do in a day in the life. You have to have owners is to do owner testimonials. So owner testimonials are as key because when people are, and they watch those things, clients do, prospects, and they see their peers. They see people who remind them of themselves, and they see them sitting casually talking honestly. I mean, these are not contrived and just like 3-minute infomercials, because they talk about the struggles that they went through to make the decision, and people resonate with that.
What have your experiences been? How have you been able to overcome certain challenges? Maybe there's a story or two. I remember being in the Bahamas a year or so ago, and driving by Bahamar. Obviously, a project that had some struggles early on, and just sat there. So you have projects like that, but tell me some ways you've seen developers or the marketing and sales teams pivot when you hit a difficulty.
I think the single greatest pivot in the history of our business started occurring in the early 2000s, and it was moving from land sales to product, to shelter. We started seeing people, and so we started working with our developers, working with our sales team to build product, because we were noticing that people's desire to be able to get something. So somebody would say, I could buy a lot, I could hire an architect, I could hire a builder, and I could go through and build my perfect 100% dream home in 2 years. Or I can spend less money, I can buy a home that I can occupy in 6 months, so I can be here in the summertime, and it's 85% of what I hoped for. And so that is the key to driving the differential. When Peter starts talking about the boom, what came out of that COVID boom was product. And that to me is the biggest pivot that we've had to make in our business.
Even beyond like 2008 with the crash?
Oh, yeah. No, it was still, I mean, it was all about product, because people were saying, everybody suffered during that 2008 to 2011 timeframe. But it was all about product. And for example, in that same timeframe in Tahoe, we had at 2008, we had probably close to 200 owners of 563 lots. And we made a decision because we had all these craftsmen, all these incredible trade contractors, builders that were in the Tahoe market because it had been booming for so long. And they were like freaking out, going, what in the world? We were selling 100 lots a year and we were down to like doing 25. So we sent out a letter to all of our existing owners. We said, if you ever thought about building at Mars Camp, this is the absolute greatest time you could ever do it. We got all these contractors, they're hungry for work, they've got time. And we ended up getting, in a matter of 6 months, we got 65 housing starts at Mars Camp. And so we catapulted out of the 2008 downturn with new homes, huge construction activity. So when somebody showed up, they're seeing all these bulldozers and framers and contractors, and they're going, this place is rocking, man. So that was a big deal. And that's another pivot that we had to make.
That brings to mind, in terms of uncertainties and where are we going. I mean, AI is obviously, something that's basically changing all of the rules. I mean, in terms of your business and your marketing, what's next in terms of, marketing tactics? As a creative director, I'm obviously interested in creative. I mean, do you see things where AI being able to use more things to build that dream, vision and in your sales process?
So I have a few thoughts on AI. Overarching thought is what we talked about earlier. And Altman said, he was being interviewed by Theo Vaughn on a podcast, and Vaughn was saying how afraid of AI he was, and he wanted Altman to kind of reassure him that things were going to be okay. And what he said was, there's no question that there's going to be some dramatic impact across every discipline that we know. But he said, people who are really embracing of the technology and they understand that that technology is going to be incredibly efficient at doing all of the minutia, all of the stuff that takes us so much time, reviewing formulas in an Excel spreadsheet to make sure we got the formula right. And if we use that correctly, we free ourselves up to do long-term thinking, long-range planning, and we become better thinkers and planners at that.
So what you're saying is really use the strengths that humans possess in creating, strategizing, vision casting, and let AI do the mundane things that that suck up our time.
If we try to compete against them, job for job, it's like you were talking about estimating. There's no way, okay? So the other thing I think is going to be critical is that when we go back and we talk about the divergent of clients. So we had the baby boomers that are still, they're still spending a ton of money. And you got the wealthy millennials that are coming through. The way they look at technology and AI is radically different. The millennials embrace it. So you could, in theory, say, I'm gonna create an entirely AI-generated sales process with computer-generated personalities who are gonna walk me through. They're gonna be like on-screen salespeople. And the millennials will say, okay, that's an interesting journey. The boomers are gonna be untrusting of that. As much as they wanna be tech savvy, they're gonna be untrusting of that.
And what we're seeing is actually on the younger generation side, that distrust of AI, especially in imagery and people,
Right.
because they're so used to seeing that and recognizing, okay, this looks too similar. This does not look authentic.
They can critique it.
Yeah. And so they're actually pushing that away. Like, oh, that's just AI, and they discount it. So all the effort, put into that actually could backfire.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say on that is the way I envision us as a sales team using that technology is that it creates for tremendous personalization of brochures and information that can be highly personalized to your prospect. And then you can create with your iPhone, you can create dramatic video content through AI. If you're out showing a piece of property that somebody has an interest in, as opposed to spending $15,000. Sorry, it kind of takes away from you. But sales guys that have the ability to go out and use their phone and create and
And they're
do it.
doing a great job with it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
it's
it's
incredible stuff.
but the personalization of information, very specifically, is a huge deal.
And on that same note, I want to touch on the consumer side of that. And I just heard some talk about that a minute ago too, is that uh, we're seeing the consumers use AI more and more for their searches. They're bypassing Google's now, and they're using ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini. Thinking about it in a scenario of when I'm whipping out my phone, what's the best golf course community? What's the best surfing community? What's the best community on the coastal corridor off of I-95 that has an ice cream parlor that the kids can eat at? We as marketers have to address that, have to understand what the searches are going to become so that our projects show up when that ideal client is looking for the stuff that we offer.
The consumer is more and more, like you said, going to have that, and already does today, in the palm of their hand.
Right.
Like I saw images. We bought a new house about 60 days ago, and my wife is using ChatGPT to say, take a picture of this room. How should we decorate it?
Right.
Well, if your sales guy can't do that, you're already behind.
Oh yeah.
Because that's so much an instant gratification that we have available to us everywhere we go in the palm of our hand with our
And how
phone.
much will it cost?
Yeah.
Very much.
Yeah. So you have to be up as a salesperson with that tech that people already have as well.
How, with all these changes with the tools that are available and the technologies and the personalization, how is that going to be affecting how you staff your organizations and the teams that you build to be able to make these new technologies?
It's an ever-present conversation we have on our team. Got a team that has spanned the generation. We've got people who have been working in this space since the 90s. We have people who are 5 years out of college that are also part of Real Living. And the way I would say it is that we don't intend to use AI to replace anybody. But just as Dan was talking about how AI can help us improve productivity and get that spreadsheet right, I think these are tools that help our brilliant creatives, our graphic designers, our copywriters, our video production teams just get better at what they do and eliminate a lot of what used to be, not necessarily busy work, but just tedious stuff that can now be accomplished through the tools that are coming to our possession now. And we're just barely scratching the surface. This is the internet of 1996 we are experiencing that again at this moment in time. And so those people who were fearful in 96 or 92 or whatever year you want to go to that the internet was going to take our job, guess what? That same sky is falling mentality exists today, but the internet didn't take our jobs. Look at my job wouldn't exist if the internet had not come into fruition.
It makes our jobs more, we do what we do better because of it. It's not that it replaces us. And I think that's the fear that people have.
Altman's. That's his whole point, if we embrace it. And everything is cyclical and things come full cycle. And like, for example, we went through a 20-year period of whenever their automated phone systems, where you couldn't talk to a live person no matter where you were, right? Now, all of a sudden, if you start to listen, there are businesses that have emerged so that you are guaranteed to talk to a knowledgeable live voice every time you call. And people put huge value on that now because they feel like they can get something done. And I don't for 1 minute try to cast aspersions or cast aside the incredible impact that because I don't think that in the history of technology that anything is as powerful and is potentially leading to dystopian, man versus machine. We are on the precipice for sure. And it's going to radically change how we think. But I think we have been given the ability to reason and to think ourselves alongside of that and how it becomes part of who we are and what we do. From a sales organization standpoint, I think we can virtually move people almost to the precipice of purchasing a $2 million second home. But you're going to have a trained, knowledgeable, live person to execute that transaction.
I think that's one of the interesting things to me that I'm starting to see a lot more and read a lot more about, that kind of like the countervailing trend of AI is people are seeking out more authenticity, more human contact. I mean, Generation Alpha, which is, the youngest of the generations, they're gravitating to an analog world. They're playing cards. They're playing board games, doing things that, maybe the Gen Zs were, all about the digital thing, that these people they're kind of familiar with the digital, they get it, but they're seeking other new things. I think that's an interesting marketing opportunity for people as well, is how to, now that the AI has kind of freed us up to do the mundane tasks, how can we bring more of the human factor into the sales process in our marketing in general?
I don't know if you guys remember the movie Crash. The opening scene of that movie was an automobile accident in Los Angeles. And the narrator comes on and he says, as humans, we have this overwhelming desire to reach out and touch or brush up against another human being. And in LA, we get up in our air-conditioned homes, we go to our garage, we get in our air-conditioned cars, we drive our cars to a parking garage, we go into our air-conditioned offices, and we have very few opportunities to actually brush up and touch another human. So we've compensated for that by crashing into one another. So we can get that sense about who we are. And I always thought that was such a great, it's a great way to talk about how we are as humans. And I do believe we have that need.
You think the days of, $400 leather booklets and that tactile marketing is coming back?
It depends. I mean, digital printing obviously does that. But my point about personalization, if I can create for a client a memory book that's highly personalized, that I can get it sent to them, absolutely. They'll put it in a briefcase and drive around or sit on an airplane because it's tactile. But producing 10,000 of them, that's gone.
We're big believers. We create these leather-bound books. They're massive. They're 3 feet long, 2 feet wide, and the salesperson wanders the property with the customer, and you stop in this field with some swaying grass, and you say, "You see that? This is going to be the clubhouse, and there's going to be a pool right here. There's going to be a little area to play basketball over here. Let's sit down at this picnic table." And they unfurl this leather book.
It's a big scroll.
Just kind of
it's a huge scroll.
ends right here. And they just start looking through the canvas pages about what this place is going to be like. And when you're
kind of invites them into the performance almost.
Absolutely.
And turn it into a tactile experience.
In your pre-development phases of these properties, that's, I think, another turn on for that consumer, is they're kind of getting to be a part of the process as well. And while they don't necessarily get to customize each and everything, they get to watch this unfold, and they get to be a part of that founding early adopter. And that's what we always look for, is that person that was the first in line to buy an iPhone is probably going to be that founding person too.
We used to, back in the day, early day, we used to run a lot of in-home presentations. And the general rule was you walk in and the family always want to sit in the living room. And as a sales guy, you said, "Can we sit at a kitchen table?" Because when you unfurled the map, you wanted them leaning down, as opposed to sitting back in a chair and you're trying to point to it. You wanted them leaning over the table because it was interactive.
Interesting.
Interactive. And that's what he's talking about with that scroll.
And that's where the family decisions are made anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So anyway.
That's really neat.
Yeah.
Well, as we wrap up today, we're going to do a quick lightning round and hand it over to Curt with some questions just to hit us with some very practical, answers to some of these things that people are probably wondering.
Some of these things, actually, some of these things we've touched upon already, but in this lightning round, what are you seeing as your best channel for ROI right now?
Best channel for ROI to this day continues to be digital, pay-per-click advertising in our space. While it's kind of blanketed in that space, if you're there's 7 or 8 buckets that leads come from, but for the kind of the Goldilocks zone of lead volume and lead quality, it's pay-per-click advertising.
Ours is video content, and we were so optimistic about how AI is going to positively change that.
And even today, like we were doing a video last week where the client provided us with a photograph from an international destination. This is the only one they had, fairly low quality, and we were missing really any emotion from it. We really wanted to use that in that video, like B-roll, which is showing what they're saying in real video form. So with AI, within a matter of a few minutes, we turned that photo into an actual video clip that we embedded in, and the client said, "Wait, wasn't that the photo we gave you?" So the things you can do with even low resolution, assets today that you shoot with your phone, that then you can turn into video clips that go with a testimonial, really adds that extra creativity that we were talking about.
Next one is kind of related, but it's beyond kind of like channels. But what is the one resource or tool that you cannot do without to do your job well?
For me, and this is a personality tour. This is a director of sales. That is the tool that I have to have that is cohesive, that brings the whole thing together, on-site, full-time, 100% focused on that. That's the number one thing we look for.
Yeah, in a perspective of a person that brings value on our projects, internally, we have a director of operations, and she is the complete overseer of everything that happens at Real Living Productions. It's awesome to watch our teams on video conferences with a client, and it it's mind-numbing how much they must have sat in and learned on their own that they can have these conversations with the clients, and it just they have so much knowledge and wealth of experience within that.
Isn't
So
it ironic that we both talked about staff, about humans,
Mhm.
as opposed to
That
widget-
was
as
honestly,
opposed to widgets?
I didn't think you were going to go
Yeah,
there. That's
I thought you
fascinating.
were asking about widgets,
Yeah.
but really,
uh,
in light of the whole conversation, that
it's
Well,
the people that matter.
let's unpack that for just a second here. We don't have long, but what do you look for as far as qualities? And Dan, I know you have an innate ability, I think, in this area when it comes to people and looking for those qualities that really make for a successful, in your case, director of sales, or Peter on the operation side. What does it really take? What are you looking for?
well, first and foremost, life experience that is centered around salesmanship. Solid, great salesmanship. It doesn't have to be in the real estate world. I mean, we've had great success with guys who sell luxury cars, insurance people.
Do they have to sell kind of to the same market, or do you think it?
They're just well, luxury car guys obviously are selling to the same market, but they're just dogged. They understand the process. The other great attribute that we have found, oddly enough, is in professional golf pros. They are so well trained at being around people of means and being able to make them feel comfortable. And we've had great success with a couple of guys and one woman who come from that world.
I didn't think about that. That is a very, very similar skill set.
Oh my goodness,
That's
yeah.
fascinating.
Well, they spend 5 hours with a guy who's the chairman of AT&T, and he's nervous as he can be. And that pro's job, if he's, most pros, some are, but most of them are guys that are just trying to say, hey, we're out here for 5-6 hours. Let's just have some fun. And let me give you a few tips. And, and then those guys, if they're smart, because they know their pro career is limited. So they're keeping a database, a CRM, if you will, of every contact, so that when it's time, they can call up so-and-so at AT&T or whomever, and they've got an in. So they're thinking long-term, and that's what we kind of look for, is people that are saying they're not reacting in the moment.
Yeah.
They understand there's a bigger
really
plan.
Insightful.
There's a bigger plan at play here.
Mm-hmm.
What is your hot take on, market? It can be, in your category or in marketing in general, that might be a particularly controversial or contrarian point of view.
I think the people who are going to succeed in whatever marketing, whatever kind of product to high net worth individuals, are people who are going to run towards those people with an absolute goal of understanding, and they're not going to be scared away by, the flights of fancy, the current trends. They're going to really dig deep down and understand what it is that they do and how they do it well, and they're going to stick to it and go for it.
I think you're going to start to see, because the person's attention span is so much shorter now, I think you're going to see much more abbreviated campaigns that happen. So when it used to be a 50-page website, these things are going to get much shorter.
It'll be like landing pages.
More landing pages, more tailored to approaches to that specific audience. So the utilization of AI at this point, combined with the fact that a person's attention span is 3 seconds or however short it may be now, is going to cause this demand for much more abbreviated marketing.
It takes, someone that is trained to think from the mind of the consumer, the prospect, to be able to break down those, masses of information, that decision tree, into something simple, into something clear, into something that just grabs your attention. And it's not a lot of words usually, but it's the right words.
And there's a level of urgency that underlies that. You don't have to say, if you don't buy this today, there's like 10 people going to buy it tomorrow. But you have to present that with a sense of urgency that the customer at least says, you know what, we need to make a decision.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Well, thank you again for the perspectives you both have shared. And
great questions.
Really
Great questions.
Appreciate what you guys said about personalization, about the journey, about urgency. I really like that. The dirt to the dream, casting that vision, the tools, even how to use video effectively with owner testimonials. I think the audience probably picked up a lot of very practical insights to help them be better marketers, but at the end of the day, be better leaders. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it so much.